The Cold War. The Cold War was a conflict primarily between the USSR, or the Soviet Union, and the United States of America, and it happened after World War II, post 1945. After World War II, Europe had a lot of issues. Most of it had been destroyed due to all the land fighting and air fighting with World War II, and they had to figure out ways to rebuild. They had to figure out what to do with all the land that Hitler had conquered, where to draw new boundaries, and they also had to deal with the fact that Stalin and the Soviet Union army was not removing itself from the Eastern European countries they had gone through to defeat Hitler. Their army was just staying there, and so there was a lot of conflict, a lot of tension. Now, Western Europe is known for democracy and free enterprise. We call that capitalism, when the consumer makes the choices. The government doesn't tell you what to buy and doesn't tell you what the price is. The consumer or the buyer makes all that. Great Britain, France, and most European countries are also capitalist and democratic countries. Eastern Europe, okay, the European countries closest to the USSR are now Russia, all right, were communist. That meant command economy, the government controls everything, and the leader, the dictator, in this case you see a picture of Joseph Stalin, makes all the decisions. You have no freedoms, you have no choice, you do what the government tells you. And you can see there in the map, all of those purple to red to brown countries are all communist countries controlled by the Soviet Union. Now, after World War II, Stalin hoped to create a buffer zone of friendly governments to prevent possible attacks from Germany and other nations. Soon Europe was divided on an imaginary line called the Iron Curtain. Winston Churchill coined this term, the Iron Curtain, in a very, very famous speech. Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, England, during this time. And basically you had this imaginary curtain or boundary, with Western Europe being known for democracy and freedom and rights, and Eastern Europe being known as communist, command economy, no rights, no freedoms, dictator telling you what to do. And Stalin hoped that with these Eastern European countries, they would provide a protection, where if any of the Western European countries decided to attack the USSR, they'd have to travel through the Eastern European countries before they ever hit the homeland of the Soviet Union. Now, Germany was split into West Germany and East Germany after World War II. Now, West Germany, which was controlled by the United States, France, and Great Britain, was democratic. All right, they basically wrote constitutions. Germany was allowed to have capitalism, democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and all that. One of the first things they did was they outlawed the Nazi Party, and the Nazis' commanders that they were able to find were put on trial, called the Nuremberg trials, and they were crimes against humanity. These trials were the first in the world to basically say that even in a time of war, there are rules and things that an army and a country cannot do, and specifically targeting and wiping out people based on their religion, their race, their gender, their skin color is not right. And the Nazis that were put on trial in Nuremberg, Germany, were found guilty. They were either hung, shot, some committed suicide before they even got the chance. Many Nazis ran to South America to hide out, and that would later leave many Nazi hunters, literally Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, whom would go and look for the guys who tortured them when they were in the concentration camps. With help from the Allied forces, Germany's new federal constitution included a guarantee of political asylum, which is political protection, which means that nobody was going to pick on anybody in Germany. There would be no bullying, that you would automatically get political asylum if you went there. Now in Japan, there was a very different idea going on. Japan had been basically occupied by primarily the United States of America. We dropped the 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Japan surrendered, and the United States basically took them over. And we told them this is how things are going to run. We made them write a new constitution. We modeled them into basically our model of democracy. And the ruler of Japan was a guy named General Douglas MacArthur, who is very famous. You might see him on the news in old war movies because everyone liked to play Douglas MacArthur. And he wanted to end militarism in Japan and ensure that they had a full democratic government. In Japan's new constitution, the constitutional monarchy was limited the power of the emperor. And war was not a political weapon for Japan. It was a democratic government that guaranteed basic freedoms and women's suffrage. Now, this was a hard one. In Japan, women were seen as having no rights. They were literally second-class citizens. And it took Japan many, many months to write this new constitution because the United States had sent over a team to help them write this new constitution. And the head of that team that President Truman appointed was a woman. And Japan had a very hard time having to take orders from a woman. And she would not accept any constitution from the Japanese government that did not have a woman's right to vote in it. So there was a lot of back and forth tension, and eventually Japan came around and they just gave women the right to vote. But it was a very hard fight because they did not want to do that. Today, Japan and the United States are very close. We are allies. They get most of their natural resources from us. And it's because we helped rebuild them after World War II, and we keep that good trading partnership and technology partnership going. The two massive superpowers left after World War II was the Soviet Union, here seen as the CCP Superman, and of course the USA Superman. All right, and they basically dominated global affairs throughout the world for about the next 40 to 50 years. They were the two left. Britain had to be rebuilt. France had to be rebuilt. So there really was a shift in the world powers and in world politics after World War II. The Cold War begins. Following World War II, basically the Cold War was a conflict in ways of thinking. It never went to an actual war with guns and bombings and dead bodies. It was a war of words and a war of thoughts. And it was a continued state of tension and hostility between us and the Soviet Union. You will hear people to say now on the news that due to the things going on with Vladimir Putin, the Prime Minister of Russia, that the Cold War has warmed up again because Putin does not get along with the U.S. and we don't get along with him because of some of the things he does. But the Cold War is just basically a tension between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. This tension was a result of differences in economic and political thinking. The U.S. is all democratic and capitalist, while the Soviet Union is the opposite, being command economy, communist, no rights, no freedoms. And as I said, it was a Cold War because no actual armed battle occurred between the superpowers. Stalin forced pro-communist governments in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and elsewhere. Basically, as I said, the Russian army, the Soviet Union army, during World War II went through Czechoslovakia, Poland, and the Eastern European states to help defeat Hitler. Now, after World War II, the United States, France, everybody else's armies went home. Stalin's didn't. It stayed and basically took over those Eastern European countries. The Eastern European countries didn't like it, but there was nothing they could do because they had no way to fight off the Soviet Union army. So eventually Stalin's going to start putting pressure on Greece and on Turkey and all sorts of different countries to make them go communist. Truman was not going to have this, President Truman of the United States. So he passed the Truman Doctrine, which basically was a program to help countries resist the Soviet aggression. We promised to send them money, we promised to send the countries military aid, as long as they did not go communist. Now, the Truman Doctrine core was based on the theory of containment. You have to know this for the regions. It's important. Containment is basically just limiting the spread of communism into areas outside of the Soviet Union. So just think of when you put water in a container, it can't move, it's in a small space. You want to do the same thing with communism. We did not want it to spread all around the world. We wanted to keep it to a small area, contain it. Truman sent economic and military aid to Greece and Turkey, and both of them pledged to resist communism. Now, part 2 of Truman's plan was the Marshall Plan in 1947, and this was a huge economic package that was designed to strengthen democratic governments and lessen the appeal of communism. Basically help Europe rebuild after World War II. We sent literally hundreds of millions of dollars to Europe to help them rebuild so they did not go and take Russia's money. Because just like we were offering money and help to these countries, so was Stalin and the Soviet Union, and we were trying to basically make a better deal so these countries did not go to communism, did not team up with the Soviet Union. In most cases, the Marshall Plan won.